A thrilling story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. She was a virgin, married, and betrayed even before the honeymoon. But a mysterious millionaire one night said, "If I touch you, I won't stop." Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by it. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. We post videos like this every day, continuing. The taste of freedom had a bitter flavor in Eleanor Montgomery's mouth. Sitting in the first-class seat of the New York Newport flight, she watched the clouds dissolve like wet cotton while trying to decipher what she felt. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't sadness. It was something more complex, as if she were waking from a very long dream and discovering that real life was stranger than any fantasy. Beside her, Henry leafed through financial documents with the same concentration he dedicated to everything in life. Methodical, predictable, safe. During their 3-year engagement, Eleanor had convinced herself that this tranquility was exactly what she needed after a youth suffocated by impossible expectations. Now, just hours after the altar, she discovered that too much security could be as imprisoning as the control she had left behind in Westfield. The ceremony at Grace Church had been perfect, every detail carefully orchestrated by her mother, Lillian Montgomery, as if it were a theatre piece where everyone knew their roles by heart. Helena had walked down the aisle in a French lace dress that cost more than a compact car, smiling at the 200 guests who observed her as if she were a work of art on display. Judge Montgomery, her father, had handed her to Henry with the pride of someone finally fulfilling an important mission, and she had said yes with the firm voice of someone who had learned from an early age that hesitation was a sign of weakness. But something had changed the instant the church doors closed behind her, a strange sensation, as if she had left an important part of herself at the altar, along with the bouquet of white roses. During the reception, she had danced waltzes she had learned at 8, conversed in 3 languages with international guests, and posed for hundreds of photos that would be published in the society columns of Boston. Everything exactly as it should be. Everything exactly as it always had been. It was only when she boarded the plane that she felt the first taste of strangeness. Henry didn't hold her hand during takeoff, as he had done on the 3 flights they had shared during their engagement. He didn't comment on the scenery when they flew over the Berkshires. He didn't ask if she was nervous, excited, or afraid. He was simply there, but not really present. As if he were already fulfilling an obligation he would prefer to postpone indefinitely. Eleanor knew that behavior. She had grown up surrounded by men who treated relationships like business and displays of affection as political strategies. Her father was like that with her mother. Her uncles were like that with her aunts. It was the emotional language of the Montgomery family, respectful, courteous, and profoundly empty. She had hoped marriage would change this, that intimacy would force Henry to reveal the man behind the impeccable manners. Now she suspected that perhaps there was nothing beyond the manners. The hotel in Newport was an architectural jewel suspended between sky and sea. The Vanderbilt house, a mansion transformed into a luxury inn, where each suite was a small kingdom with a view of the Atlantic coast. Eleanor had dreamed of that place since she had seen the first photos on the website. Terraces covered with bougainvillea, secret gardens perfumed with jasmine, balconies where time seemed to move more slowly. It was the perfect setting to discover who they were as a couple, away from the vigilant eyes of their families. The check-in was quick and efficient. The suite, stunning. 2 balconies, a marble bathtub with a view of the sea, a living room decorated with authentic antiques, and a huge bed covered by Italian lace canopy. Eleanor walked to the main balcony and took a deep breath. The air tasted of salt and freedom. For the first time in months, she felt she could breathe completely. Henry, however, was busy checking emails on his phone. When she commented on the beauty of the view, he muttered something about the unfavorable exchange rate of the euro and locked himself in the bathroom for a shower that lasted 40 minutes. When he came out, wearing a white hotel robe, Eleanor was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing her travel dress, waiting for some sign that the honeymoon had officially begun. "I'm exhausted," he said, avoiding looking directly at her. "It's been intense months organizing everything. I think we'd better rest today." Eleanor felt a twinge of something she couldn't immediately identify. Disappointment? Relief? Maybe it was a mixture of both. Part of her expected him to be affectionate, romantic, eager to finally be alone. Another part feared exactly that. Physical intimacy was the most unknown territory in her carefully controlled life. At 27, her knowledge of sex came from medical books she had read hidden in the university library and from whispered conversations with the few friends her mother considered suitable. "Of course," she replied, trying to sound understanding. "I'm tired too." She was awake, nervous, curious. But she had learned long ago that well-intentioned lies were a form of kindness. Henry set up a sort of makeshift office in the living room, with laptop, documents, and several phones. He said he needed to resolve some urgent matters related to the company's investments. Eleanor dined alone on the balcony, watching the lights of Newport twinkle in the distance like giant fireflies. The Cabernet Sauvignon that accompanied the lobster risotto was her first honest company of the night. At least alcohol didn't pretend to have interest it didn't feel. Around 11 o'clock, when she finally went to bed, she discovered that Henry had installed himself on the living room sofa. "So as not to disturb you," he explained when she asked. "I have some calls to make in the early hours because of the time difference." Eleanor was left alone in the marriage bed, watching the canopy sway with the night breeze, trying to understand, if what she felt was loneliness or peace. Maybe they were the same thing, maybe they always were. The next morning she awoke to the sound of voices coming from the balcony. Henry was on the phone, speaking in English about bank transfers and tax audits. She dressed unhurriedly and went down to breakfast alone. The hotel restaurant was on a terrace covered with vines, with a panoramic view of the Atlantic. There were only two other couples having breakfast, both clearly on honeymoon, whispering intimacies and sharing croissants with the familiarity of those who had found in each other an accomplice. Eleanor sat at a table for two and ordered espresso, orange juice and French bread with fig jam. The food was delicious, but eating alone on her own honeymoon had a strange taste, like champagne that had lost its bubbles. She was finishing her second cup of coffee when she noticed the man sitting 3 tables ahead. He was reading a book with a black cover, holding a glass of red wine at a time of day when normal people drank coffee. He had dark hair slightly graying at the temples, a discreet but visible scar cutting the line of his jaw, and wore a white shirt open at the chest with the casualness of someone who doesn't need to try to look interesting. When he raised his eyes from the book, Eleanor noticed they were of a very particular greyish blue, like the sea on cloudy days. For a second their gazes crossed. He observed her with an intensity that made her blush involuntarily. It wasn't the kind of look she normally received, respectful, admiring, but distant. It was something more direct, almost intimate, as if he recognized her from somewhere. Eleanor quickly lowered her eyes, pretending interest in her own coffee, but she felt the weight of his gaze on her skin. When she raised her head again, he had resumed reading, but was smiling slightly, as if he knew exactly the effect he had caused. Eleanor finished her coffee faster than she intended and returned to the suite, her heart beating at a slightly altered rhythm. Henry was on the phone again, gesturing to papers spread across the table. He waved to her distractedly and continued the conversation. Eleanor changed, put on a discreet bikini under a linen dress, and went down to the pool. The hotel was small enough to be intimate, but large enough to ensure privacy. The pool was on a level below the restaurant, surrounded by loungers and striped umbrellas. She chose a chair with a view of the sea and opened a book she had bought at Logan Airport. Historical romance, something about a French countess in the 18th century who fell in love with a privateer. Safe, predictable reading, with the exact dose of passion to entertain without disturbing. But she discovered she couldn't concentrate on the words. Her eyes wandered over the landscape, absorbing every detail of the almost unreal beauty of the place. That was when she heard the voice. Dostoevsky or Hawthorne? Eleanor looked up and saw the man from breakfast standing next to her lounger. Up close, he was even more impressive. Tall, with a presence that filled the space around him without apparent effort. The scar on his jaw didn't diminish his beauty. In fact, it added a layer of mystery that made him more fascinating. "Excuse me?" she asked, genuinely confused. "The book you're pretending to read," he said, pointing to the historical romance in her hands. "You've been on the same page for 20 minutes, so I imagined you were thinking about something more interesting. Dostoevsky or Hawthorne." Eleanor felt the blood rise to her cheeks. He was right. She hadn't absorbed a single line of what she had read. And the question was strange, too specific to be casual. "Why those two?" she asked, closing the book and placing it in her lap. "Because they both understood that marriage is a negotiation where no one reads the fine print," he answered, sitting down on the lounger next to her without being invited. "And you look like someone who just discovered that." The observation was so accurate that Eleanor was momentarily speechless. Who was this man who could read her emotional state as if it were an open book? "You don't know me," she finally said, trying to sound firmer than she felt. "Lucas Blackwood," he introduced himself, extending his hand, "and you are Eleanor Montgomery Whitman. I saw your photo in the American newspapers. Fairy tale wedding between America's most powerful families. Wedding of the year between the most powerful families in Massachusetts." Eleanor shook his hand briefly, feeling an unexpected electric discharge in the contact. His skin was warm, slightly rough, with calluses that suggested he worked with his hands despite his apparent wealth. "You read Boston newspapers?" she asked, trying to disguise her nervousness. "I read all kinds of newspapers. It's an occupational deformity." Lucas leaned back in the lounger, completely at ease, as if he had known Eleanor for years. "And you, do you read Newport papers?" "Not much. Lucky you. If you did, you'd know I'm not exactly the type of company a newlywed should keep." There was something in the way he said this, half playful, half serious, that made Eleanor shiver. Was it a warning or an invitation? Or both? "Why not?" she asked, surprising herself with her own curiosity. Lucas smiled but didn't answer immediately. Instead, he signaled to a waiter and ordered 2 Bellinis. "Because you seem like the kind of woman who was raised to be perfect," he said finally. "And I'm exactly the kind of man who destroys perfect women." The waiter brought the drinks. Eleanor took hers automatically but didn't drink. She was trying to decipher if Lucas was flirting or warning her to stay away. Maybe they were the same thing. "You don't seem destroyed," she observed. "Appearances deceive," he replied, taking a sip of the cocktail. "But thanks for the optimism." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching a group of seagulls gliding over the waves. Eleanor felt she should get up, return to the suite, look for Henry, and behave as a newlywed wife should behave. But something kept her there, as if Lucas were a fascinating book she had just opened. "Why are you alone?" he asked, breaking the silence. "I'm not alone." "My husband is—" Eleanor hesitated. What was Henry doing? Working? Avoiding her? "Resolving some work matters." "On the honeymoon?" "They're urgent matters." "Of course they are." Lucas finished the Bellini and stood up. "Well, Eleanor Montgomery Whitman, it was a pleasure to meet you. And some advice. When you're reading Dostoevsky or Hawthorne, start with The Gambler or The Scarlet Letter. Both talk about men who destroy what they most love." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with the untouched cocktail and a strange feeling in her chest. It was as if he had opened a door she didn't even know existed, and then left her to decide whether she wanted to cross it or not. Eleanor remained at the pool until late afternoon, alternating between swimming and reading the same paragraph dozens of times. When she returned to the suite, she found Henry exactly where she had left him in the morning, surrounded by papers and phones. He muttered something about an important virtual meeting and didn't even look up when she passed by. She took a long shower, chose a navy blue dress that enhanced her eyes, and went down to dine alone again. Lucas wasn't in the restaurant, but Eleanor found herself looking for him. The food was excellent, but she barely noticed the taste. Her mind was occupied trying to understand why a stranger had managed to see things in her that her own husband seemed to ignore. After dinner, she walked through the hotel gardens. It was a warm night, perfumed by the smell of flowers and sea breeze. Other guests walked hand in hand or conversed in low voices on benches scattered among the rose bushes. Eleanor sat on a stone wall that overlooked the cliff and watched the lights of the fishing boats twinkling on the horizon. That was when it started to rain. A fine rain, almost a drizzle, that transformed the air into silvery mist. Most people ran for shelter, but Eleanor remained where she was. The warm water moistened her dress and her hair, and for the first time since she could remember, she didn't worry about protecting herself or keeping up appearances. She closed her eyes and let the rain wash the strange day from her skin. When she opened them, Lucas was standing a few meters away, watching her with the same intensity as in the morning. He didn't say anything, just observed her as if he were trying to memorize every detail of that image. Eleanor felt she should explain herself, say something, but the words wouldn't come. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving the air clean and charged with electricity. Lucas approached slowly, as if not wanting to frighten her. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know," she replied, surprised by her own honesty. "That's the most interesting answer you've given me so far." Eleanor laughed, a low and melancholy sound. "I'm not a very interesting person." "Lie," said Lucas, stopping right in front of her. "You're probably the most interesting person in this hotel. You just don't know it yet." They looked at each other in silence. There was something happening between them, a tension that Eleanor had never experienced before. It was like standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one step forward would change everything forever. "I should go back," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "You should," Lucas agreed. But neither of them moved. The tension became almost unbearable. Eleanor felt she was on the verge of doing something irrevocable, something that would change not just her honeymoon, but her entire life. It was terrifying and exciting at the same time. It was Lucas who broke the moment, taking a step back. "Good night, Eleanor," he said softly. "Dream of Dostoevsky." He walked away, leaving her alone on the wet wall, with her heart beating strongly and the sensation that she had just escaped from something dangerous or lost something extraordinary. She didn't know the difference. When she returned to the suite, she found Henry sleeping on the sofa, with the laptop still open on his chest and papers scattered on the floor. She covered him with a blanket, collected the documents, and went to bed alone in the marriage bed. But she couldn't sleep. She lay looking at the ceiling, thinking of grayish-blue eyes and the way Lucas had pronounced her name. As if it were a new word he was learning to say, as if it were important. For the first time since the wedding, Eleanor wondered who she really was. Not Lillian Montgomery's daughter, not Henry Whitman's wife, but she, Eleanor, the woman who danced alone in the rain and who felt something break inside her whenever a stranger looked at her, as if she were worthy of being seen. It was a dangerous question, because the more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't know the answer, and something inside her suspected that Lucas Blackwood could help her discover it, or destroy her in the process. Maybe they were the same thing. The second day in Newport began with the sound of rain hitting the windows of the suite. Eleanor woke up alone once again, but this time she didn't feel the pang of loneliness that had accompanied her since her arrival. On the contrary, there was a kind of expectation vibrating in her skin, as if something important was about to happen. Henry was no longer on the sofa when she left the bedroom. She found a note on the center table, written in the meticulous handwriting she knew well. "Need to resolve urgent matters in Boston. Back tonight. Enjoy the day at the hotel." Signed simply with H, not even a "with love," not even a "Miss You." Just the distant courtesy of a work colleague. Eleanor crumpled the paper between her fingers, feeling a mixture of irritation and relief. Irritation because she was beginning to suspect that those urgent matters were a convenient excuse to avoid intimacy. Relief because it meant she would have the whole day to herself, without having to pretend she was happy with the situation. She wore a simple but elegant white linen dress and went down for breakfast. The restaurant was almost empty because of the rain, just two American couples discussing tourist itineraries and a French lady reading Le Figaro while eating croissants with jam. Lucas wasn't there. Eleanor was surprised by the disappointment she felt when she looked for him and didn't find him. She had spent much of the night thinking about what he had said about Dostoevsky and perfect women, trying to decipher if they were compliments or warnings. Maybe they were both. She ordered double espresso and toast with olive oil, trying to look like a woman who wasn't waiting for anyone in particular. But her eyes kept wandering to the entrance of the restaurant, betraying her apparent tranquility. That was when she heard the deep voice behind her. "It's raining too much to read by the pool today." Eleanor turned and found Lucas standing next to her table, holding a black umbrella and wearing a dark wool coat that made him look even more imposing. His hair was slightly wet from the rain, and there were droplets of water caught in his dark eyelashes. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound casual. "I thought you were the type who only appears at night." "I'm full of surprises," he replied, pulling out a chair without being invited. "May I?" Eleanor nodded yes, although she knew she should say no, that she should finish her coffee quickly and return to the suite, that she should behave like a responsible newlywed wife. But the grey morning and Henry's absence made social rules seem less important. "Your husband left early," observed Lucas, signaling to the waiter. "I saw the car leaving the hotel around 7. "Work," explained Eleanor, trying not to sound defensive. "Always work. Even on the honeymoon?" "Especially on the honeymoon." Lucas ordered American coffee and bread with prosciutto, then leaned back in his chair and observed her with that disturbing intensity. It was as if he were trying to read a secret language written in her expression. "May I ask an indiscreet question?" he said. "You may ask. I don't guarantee I'll answer. Why did you marry him?" The question was so direct that Eleanor almost choked on her coffee. It was exactly the kind of question no one dared ask a Montgomery. Marriages in her family were treated like business mergers. Questioning them was almost a social heresy. "Why does any woman marry?" she responded evasively. "Love, passion, companionship, financial security, family pressure, pregnancy, loneliness. Revenge." Lucas enumerated the options as if he were reading a shopping list. "Which one?" Eleanor remained silent for a long moment, stirring the sugar in her coffee with more attention than necessary. It was a simple question that shouldn't be difficult to answer. But the more she thought, the more she realized she didn't have an honest answer. "And you?" she returned the question. "Have you ever been married?" "Almost," replied Lucas, and something in his expression closed slightly. It didn't work out. Why? She disappeared. The way he said it, too casual, too controlled, made Eleanor shiver. There were layers of pain and anger in those two words that he tried to hide, but couldn't completely. Disappeared how? How? People disappear when they don't want to be found, or when someone doesn't want them to be found. Lucas drank his coffee slowly, as if he needed the time to choose his next words. "It depends on who you believe." There was something sinister in the way he talked about the subject, a darkness that contrasted with his apparent charm. Eleanor felt a chill down her spine, but also a morbid curiosity. It was like looking at a car accident. She knew she should look away, but she couldn't. "Who do you believe?" she asked. "Myself," he replied simply. "Always myself." The waiter brought the bread with prosciutto, breaking the tension of the moment. Lucas thanked him in perfect Italian and began to eat with the same casual elegance with which he did. Everything. Eleanor observed him, trying to reconcile the charming and sophisticated man before her with the dark implications of what she had just heard. "You think I'm dangerous?" he said, as if he had read her thoughts. "Should I?" "Probably." Lucas smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. "But you're not going to walk away, are you?" It was more a statement than a question, and Eleanor discovered he was right. There was something about Lucas that attracted her like a magnet, despite all the warning signs her conservative upbringing sent her, or perhaps because of them. "Why do you want me to walk away?" she asked. "Because you're married, because you're obviously a decent woman who was raised to do the right things, because I have a terrible reputation and an even worse past." Lucas finished his coffee and leaned forward, lowering his voice. "And because if I spend more time with you, I'll want to touch you. And if I touch you, It won't be the way your husband probably touches you. It will be like a man who knows the value of what he has in his hands." Eleanor's blood boiled with his words. It was the kind of declaration that should have scandalized her, but instead made her feel more alive than she had felt in years. As if something asleep inside her was finally awakening. "You don't know how my husband touches me," she murmured, trying to sound indignant. "I do," said Lucas, rising from the table. "By the way you tremble when I talk about touching you. No one who is touched right reacts like that to a stranger." He left money on the table and walked away, leaving Eleanor alone with her heart racing and a sensation of heat between her legs that she had never experienced before. His words echoed in her mind like a dangerous music. She knew she should be offended, that she should go up to the suite and forget that conversation had happened. But instead, she finished her coffee slowly, savoring the taste of transgression on her tongue. When she finally went up, she found the suite empty and silent. The bed was still unmade from her restless sleep, and there was a slight smell of Henry's cologne hanging in the air. It was a familiar smell, safe, that had always reassured her before. Now it seemed bland compared to Lucas's disturbing intensity. Eleanor took a long bath, letting the hot water wash the tension from her shoulders. But as the soap foam ran down her body, she couldn't stop thinking about Lucas's words. No one who is touched right reacts like that to a stranger. Was it true? Henry touched her with respect, gentleness, consideration, but never with hunger, never as if she were something precious and dangerous at the same time. She put on a robe and lay on the bed, trying to read the historical romance she had bought at the airport. But the words danced on the page without making sense. Her mind was too busy processing the strange morning to concentrate on French privateers. Around noon, the rain stopped. The sun appeared between the clouds, transforming Newport into a gleaming jewel suspended over the sea. Eleanor dressed again and went down to explore the hotel gardens. She needed fresh air and movement to clear her mind. The gardens of the Vanderbilt house were a maze of stone paths, hidden fountains, and secret corners perfumed by jasmine and lavender. Eleanor walked aimlessly, stopping now and then to admire a particularly stunning view or an ancient sculpture half hidden among the plants. It was in one of these corners, a small marble gazebo overlooking the valley, that she found Lucas again. He was sitting on a stone bench, reading the same black-covered book as the previous morning. When he saw her, he closed the book and smiled. "I was waiting for you," he said. "How did you know I would come here?" "Because you're the kind of woman who looks for beauty when she's confused, and this is the most beautiful place in the hotel." Eleanor hesitated for a moment at the entrance to the gazebo. She knew that if she entered, she would be crossing an invisible line, that it would no longer be just a casual conversation between guests of the same hotel. It would be something else, something dangerous. She entered anyway. "What are you reading?" she asked, sitting on the bench beside him, but maintaining a prudent distance. "Montaigne," replied Lucas, showing the cover. "Essays on Human Nature, very appropriate for a conversation about unhappy marriages." "Who said my marriage is unhappy?" "No. One needs to say it. It's written in every line of your body." Lucas studied her with those disturbing eyes. "You carry tension in your shoulders, like someone who is always preparing for a battle. Your hands never stay still, as if they were looking for something to hold on to. And you look at me as if I were the first interesting thing that happened in your life in a long time." Each observation was painfully accurate. Eleanor felt as if he were dissecting her soul with the same clinical precision her father used to analyze legal cases. "You're very observant," she murmured. "It's a necessary skill in my line of work." "What work is that?" Lucas smiled, but didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened the book on a marked page and read aloud, "We are all patchwork, and so shapeless and diverse in composition that each bit, each moment, plays its own game. And there is as much difference between us and ourselves as between us and others. Montaigne believed we are multiple," he explained, closing the book again. "That the person we are in the morning can be completely different from the person we are at night. That we can be chaste and libertine, devout and sinful, noble and vile, all at the same time. And do you believe that?" I believe you're discovering that now. Lucas turned to face her completely. The Eleanor who got married 3 days ago is not the same Eleanor who is sitting here with me, and both are true. It was a disturbing and liberating idea at the same time. Eleanor had spent her entire life trying to be a consistent version of herself, the perfect daughter, the exemplary student, the ideal bride. The possibility that she could be several different people, that she could contain contradictions and complexities was both terrifying and exciting. What if I don't like who I discover I am? Then you go back to who you were before, said Lucas, but at least you'll know you had a choice. They were silent for a few minutes, observing the spectacular view of the valley. The air was charged with unspoken sexual tension, an electric current that seemed to connect them even while maintaining physical distance. Tell me about your ex-fiancé, Eleanor finally said. The change in Lucas's expression was subtle but perceptible, as if a mask had slid slightly, revealing something darker underneath. Julia, he said the name as if it had a bitter taste. She was Brazilian, coincidentally. She worked in New York in the legal sector. We met at an art auction. Like me? Nothing. Like you. Lucas laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Julia was intense, impulsive. She lived as if the world would end the next day. It was addictive, being with her. Like a very good drug that you know will kill you, but you can't stop using. What happened? She started asking questions about my family, my business, questions too specific to be casual curiosity. Later I discovered she had connections with people I preferred to keep away from my life. Lucas looked at his own hands. When I confronted her, she denied everything, said she loved me, that she would never hurt me. The next morning she had disappeared. And you think she was spying on you? I think she was in danger, and that I might have been the cause of that danger. The guilt in his voice was palpable. Eleanor felt an unexpected pang of compassion. There was something deeply human in the way he carried that weight, as if it were a wound that had never completely healed. Did you look for her? For 2 years, I hired private detectives, used all the contacts I had. Nothing. It's as if she had simply dissolved into thin air. Lucas stood up abruptly as if he could no longer stay still. The newspapers said I killed her, that I hid the body, that I used family connections to cover up the case. And did you use them? I didn't have to. There was no evidence because there was no crime, but people prefer simple stories to complicated truths. Eleanor watched him walk to the edge of the gazebo, looking at the valley with a distant expression. There was something broken in him, an emotional fissure that he tried to hide, but couldn't. Completely. Was that what attracted her? The opportunity to fix something that was damaged, or was it the possibility that he could break her too? Why are you telling me this? She asked. Lucas turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her tremble. Because you're going to hear about it anyway, and because I want you to hear it from me first. He returned to the bench, but this time sat closer. And because I need you to understand that being close to me can be dangerous. Dangerous how? For your reputation, for your marriage, for your safety. Lucas extended his hand and lightly touched her face, a contact so brief that she almost thought she had imagined it. For your heart. The touch was like an electric shock. Eleanor felt every nerve ending in her body awaken simultaneously. It was different from any physical contact she had experienced before, not gentle or respectful, but possessive, as if he were claiming something that was his by right. Lucas. I know, he murmured, withdrawing his hand. I know you should. Walk away. That you should return to your suite and forget you met me. That you should be a good wife and pretend you're happy with the life they chose for you. But you won't do that. Lucas leaned closer, whispering the words in her ear. Because for the first time in your life, you're feeling something real, and no matter how much it scares you, you don't want it to stop. Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to concentrate on her breathing. But all she could feel was the heat of his body near hers, the masculine smell of his skin, the dangerous promise in his voice. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know more than you imagine." Lucas moved away slightly, forcing her to open her eyes and face him. "I know the name of the judge who ruined my father. I know the Montgomery family's reputation in legal circles. I know your father's political connections and your husband's questionable business." Eleanor's blood froze. "What are you talking about?" "Henry Whitman isn't in Boston resolving work matters, Eleanor. He's meeting with my lawyer to discuss a lawsuit that could destroy your family." The revelation was like a punch to the stomach. Eleanor rose abruptly, feeling dizzy. "This doesn't make sense. My father is a federal judge. He's upright, respected. Your father is a powerful man who made mistakes, and those mistakes are about to become public unless certain conditions are met." Lucas also stood up, but maintained distance. "Your marriage wasn't for love, Eleanor. It was an agreement, a transaction." "You're lying. I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From the truth." Lucas ran his hands through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. "Look, I didn't intend for this to happen. I thought it would be simple. Meet the daughter of the man who destroyed my family, maybe use that as leverage in the negotiations. But then I really met you and what? And now I can't decide whether I want to protect you or possess you." The brutal honesty of the confession left Eleanor speechless. Had everything that had happened between them, the looks, the conversations, the sexual tension, been calculated, an elaborate manipulation strategy? "You approached me on purpose," she said, her voice trembling with anger and humiliation. "Yes. Everything was a farce. In the beginning, yes. And now?" Lucas looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Now I'm in love with you, and that's the worst that could have happened for everyone involved." The declaration hung in the air between them like a bomb about to explode. Eleanor felt the world spinning around her, all her certainties crumbling like sand between her fingers. "I need to go," she murmured, taking a step back. "Eleanor, wait." "No." She shook her head violently. "I don't want to hear anything else. I don't want... This can't be happening." Eleanor ran from the gazebo, climbing the stone paths toward the hotel with tears burning in her eyes. She felt as if she had just woken from a dream to discover she was living a nightmare. Everything in her life was a lie: her marriage, her family, even the first real attraction she had felt for someone. When she reached the suite, she locked the door and threw herself on the bed, finally allowing the tears to fall. She cried for lost innocence, for betrayed trust, for the discovery that she was just a piece in a game she didn't know was being played. But beneath the pain and anger, there was something else. A small and stubborn part of her heart that refused to believe everything had been false. The way Lucas looked at her, the intensity in his voice when he said he was in love, the vulnerability he had shown when talking about Julia, all of it seemed too real to be just manipulation. Eleanor got up and walked to the balcony, looking at the gardens where she had just discovered her life was an elaborate staging. She could see the gazebo in the distance, empty now but loaded with memories of a conversation that had changed everything. The sweet phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. She hesitated before answering, fearing it might be Lucas trying to explain himself. "Hello? Eleanor, darling, how's the honeymoon?" Her mother's voice sounded artificially cheerful through the line. "Mom," Eleanor tried to compose her voice. "Everything's fine. Why are you calling?" "Can't I call my daughter? I just wanted to know how you two are doing. Is Henry being attentive?" There was something in the question that sounded strange, as if her mother were testing the waters for something. "He's fine," Eleanor lied. "Very busy with work, but fine." "Ah, yes, work. Always work with these businessmen." Lillian laughed, but the sound was forced. "Well, enjoy every moment, darling. Soon you'll be back to routine." "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why? Was it so important to you and Dad that I marry Henry specifically?" The silence on the other end of the line was too long to be natural. "What a strange question, Eleanor. Henry is a good man from a good family. Why would you question this now?" "Just curiosity." "Well, stop being curious about these things and focus on being happy." Marriage is work, darling. It's not always about passion and romance like in the movies. After she hung up, Eleanor stared at the phone, feeling there were more questions than answers. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Marriage is work. Was that how she should view the rest of her life? As work? The sun was setting when Henry finally returned. Eleanor heard him entering the suite, speaking on the phone in a low voice. When he appeared on the balcony where she was sitting, he looked exhausted and irritated. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing her briefly on the forehead, an automatic gesture without real affection. "Quiet? And yours?" "Complicated." Henry poured himself a scotch from the suite's bar and sat in an armchair. "Complex legal issues. Nothing you need to worry about." "Legal issues about what?" Henry looked at her over the glass, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of something, nervousness, in his eyes. "Just business, Eleanor. It's not important. If it's affecting our honeymoon, it's important to me. Please don't start with this." His voice acquired an impatient tone she rarely heard. "I already have enough problems without you getting dramatic." The word dramatic cut like a blade. It was the same condescending tone her father used with her mother when she dared to question something. The tone of men who saw women as spoiled children who asked inconvenient questions. "Dramatic," repeated Eleanor, feeling anger growing in her chest. "You know what I mean. I'm dealing with serious issues here. I need you to be understanding." "Like Julia Campani?" Henry almost dropped the glass. His eyes widened, and all color disappeared from his face. "Where did you hear that name?" "Does it matter?" "It matters a lot." Henry rose abruptly, walking to where she was sitting. "Who said that name to you?" There was something in the intensity of his reaction that confirmed Eleanor's worst fears. Julia wasn't just a random name Lucas had mentioned. She was a piece of a much larger and more dangerous puzzle. "Answer me. Eleanor, where did you hear about Julia Campani?" "From someone who knew her." "Who?" "Lucas Blackwood." If Henry had gone pale before, now he was practically translucent. He moved away from her as if he had received an electric shock. "You spoke with Lucas Blackwood? He's staying here." "Oh, Jesus Christ." Henry ran his hands over his face, looking genuinely terrified. "Eleanor, listen to me very carefully. You cannot speak to him again. Not a word." "Why?" "Because he's dangerous. Because he's involved in things you don't understand. Because he can use you to get to me." "Use me how?" Henry hesitated, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Because our marriage isn't just about us two," he said finally. "It's about protecting our families from people like Lucas Blackwood." The confirmation of what Lucas had said was like a stab. Eleanor felt the last vestige of innocence disintegrating inside her. "So it's true," she murmured. "Our marriage was an agreement." "Eleanor, don't lie to me, at least not now." She stood up, facing him directly. "Our marriage was arranged to protect my father from some lawsuit, wasn't it?" Henry lowered his eyes, and that was answer enough. "How long have you known about Lucas?" she asked. "Since we arrived. My lawyers informed me he was here." "And you didn't think you should warn me?" "I thought I could resolve everything without involving you." "Well, you couldn't." Eleanor walked to the balcony, looking at the gardens where her life had become irrevocably complicated. "He told me everything, Henry. About Julia, about my father, about why we got married. He's manipulating you." "Maybe. But at least he's being honest about it." They were silent for a long moment, the weight of the revelations hanging between them like a toxic cloud. Eleanor felt as if she were seeing Henry and herself clearly for the first time. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Now you're going to stay away from Lucas Blackwood, and we're going to finish this honeymoon as planned. Then we go home and continue with our lives." "As if nothing happened?" "Nothing happened, Eleanor. You had some conversations with a dangerous man who is trying to use you. That doesn't change anything between us." But it changed everything. Eleanor knew she couldn't go back to being the ignorant and obedient wife she had been 3 days ago. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and now they were growing like weeds in fertile ground. "What if I don't want to continue with this life?" The question came out of her mouth before she could control herself. Henry looked at her, as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "What do you mean?" "What if I want to know the truth about everything? About my father, about Julia, about why Lucas is so dangerous that you're willing to sacrifice our honeymoon to deal with him?" "That's not an option." "Why not?" "Because you're my wife, because we have responsibilities, because there are bigger things at stake than your romantic whims." "Romantic whims?" Anger exploded in Eleanor's chest like a volcano. "Is that how you see this? As a whim?" "I see it as a confused woman being manipulated by a man who wants to destroy me." "Maybe I'm confused, but for the first time in my life I'm awake." Eleanor left the balcony and walked to the bedroom, beginning to gather her things. She didn't know exactly what she was doing, but she knew she couldn't stay there pretending everything was fine. "What are you doing?" asked Henry, following. Leaving." "Where to?" "I don't know, but I can't stay here pretending we're a happy couple when everything between us is based on lies." Henry grabbed her arm as she passed him, and for the first time since they met, his touch was not gentle. "You're not going anywhere," he said in a voice she had never heard before, cold, controlling, threatening. "Let me go. You are my wife. Your reputation, your future, your safety, everything depends on you behaving appropriately. Or what?" Henry's eyes hardened, and Eleanor saw a glimpse of the man he really was beneath the polished facade. "Or you'll discover there are consequences for stupid choices." The fear she felt at that moment was different from anything she had experienced before. It wasn't fear of Lucas with all his intensity and mystery. It was fear of the man she had married, who now held her with enough force to leave marks. "Let me go," she repeated, firmer this time. Henry released her, but didn't move away. "You don't understand what you're doing, Eleanor. You don't understand the risks." "Then explain them to me." "Some things are better left in the past." "Like Julia?" The question hit him like a slap. Henry backed away, and for the first time since they met he seemed really shaken. "Julia Campani is dead," he said finally, "and if you're not careful you might end up like her." With those words, he left the bedroom, leaving Eleanor, alone with a fear that chilled to the bone. Dead. Julia was dead, not just missing, and Henry knew it. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything that had happened. In a matter of hours, her life had transformed from a tedious fairy tale into a dark tragedy full of secrets and threats. But one thing was clear: she could no longer pretend ignorance. She needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt to discover it. And Lucas Blackwood seemed to be the only person willing to give it to her. Eleanor couldn't sleep. She spent the whole night looking at the ceiling, with Henry's words echoing in her mind like a sinister mantra. "Julia Campani is dead, and if you're not careful, you might end up like her." The threat had been veiled, but clear enough to freeze her blood. For the first time in her life, she felt real fear of the man she had married. Henry slept on the living room sofa, snoring slightly, as if he hadn't just revealed that their honeymoon was happening on top of a pile of corpses and lies. Eleanor observed him through the half-open door, trying to reconcile the man she had known for 3 years with the cold and controlling stranger who had appeared the night before. How had she been so blind? How had she not noticed that behind the courtesy was something much more dangerous? At 5 in the morning, when the first light of dawn began to brighten the sky over Newport, she made a decision. She could no longer live in ignorance. She needed the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous. And if Lucas Blackwood was the only one willing to give it, then she would have to take the risk. She dressed silently in a simple navy blue dress and flat sandals, tied her hair in a low bun, and left the suite without making a sound. The hotel corridors were empty, just a few staff doing the morning cleaning. Eleanor went down to the reception and discreetly asked about Lucas. The receptionist, a young man with kind eyes, hesitated before answering. "Mr. Blackwood is in the presidential suite, top floor," he said in accented English. "But it's very early, ma'am. Perhaps it would be better to wait." "It's urgent," Eleanor lied, forcing a smile. "Family matters." The young man seemed to believe her, giving her the suite number and instructions to get there. Eleanor went, up in the elevator with her heart beating harder with each floor. She didn't know exactly what she would say when she found him, but she knew she could no longer live with the questions burning inside her like acid. The presidential suite was at the end of a silent corridor, with large windows that offered a panoramic view of the Atlantic coast. Eleanor took a deep breath and knocked on the door, 3 firm knocks that echoed in the morning silence. Lucas opened the door wearing only black silk pajama pants, his bare torso revealing a body sculpted by exercise and marked by some scars. That told stories she didn't know. His hair was disheveled from sleep, and there was an expression of genuine surprise in his grayish-blue eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse from having just woken up. "What are you doing here? We need to talk." Lucas looked both ways down the corridor, making sure they were alone, before opening the door completely. "Come in," he said, taking a step back. The suite was stunning, with antique furniture, original, works of art on the walls, and a balcony that extended over the cliff like a platform suspended in the sky. But Eleanor barely registered the beauty of the place. Her attention was entirely focused on the man walking to a silk robe thrown over an armchair. "Sorry for the appearance," said Lucas, putting on the robe but not closing it completely. "I wasn't expecting visitors so early." "Julia is dead." The words came out of her mouth without preamble, cutting the air like a blade. Lucas froze in mid-movement, his hands stopping at the knots of the robe. "Who told you that?" "Henry. Last night." Eleanor walked to the balcony, needing the fresh air to be able to breathe. "He said, Julia Campani is dead, and that if I'm not careful, I might end up like her." Lucas approached slowly, as if he were dealing with an injured animal. "Eleanor, is it true?" She turned to face him. "Is Julia really dead?" His silence was answer enough. Eleanor felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "How?" she whispered. "Car accident. 2 years ago." Lucas's voice was too controlled, as if each word cost a physical effort. "On the road between New York and Boston. The car went off the road on a curve and rolled over." "Do you believe it was an accident?" Lucas walked to the suite's bar and poured himself a glass of whiskey, although it was only 6 in the morning. He drank it all at once before answering. "I believe Julia discovered things she shouldn't have discovered, and that certain people preferred to silence her rather than risk exposure." "What kind of things?" "Corruption, money laundering, art trafficking. A network that connects American federal judges, financial executives, and European art collectors." Lucas poured himself another glass, but this time just held it. "Your father was at the center of it all." Eleanor sat heavily in an armchair, feeling as if she had been punched in the stomach. "My father is an upright man," she said automatically, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Your father is a man who made questionable decisions when he was facing financial problems. Your mother has expensive tastes, Eleanor. The house in Westfield, the trips to Europe, your education in elite private schools, the cars, the jewelry, all of that cost much more than a federal judge's salary. He made investments. He accepted bribes," Lucas cut in with cruel gentleness, "in exchange for favorable sentences in cases involving authentication of works of art and international financial transfers. For 10 years, he helped launder money through the art market, facilitating the sale of stolen and forged pieces." Each word was like a stab. Eleanor felt her worldview crumbling like a house of cards in a storm. "How do you know this?" "Because my father was one of his victims." Lucas finally drank the whiskey, closing his eyes as if the drink burned more than it should. Franklin Blackwood owned one of the most important art collections in New England. When he decided to sell some pieces to cover debts, he hired intermediaries who guaranteed the transaction would be legal and transparent. Your father authenticated the works as originals and facilitated the transfer of payments. And the works were forgeries. The buyers discovered this and sued my father for fraud. When he tried to prove his innocence, he discovered that the authentication documents had been altered, making him guilty of a crime he didn't commit. Lucas walked to the window, looking at the sea as if he could find answers in the waves. He lost everything. His reputation, his fortune, his will to live. He killed himself 3 months before I graduated from university. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Eleanor felt tears burning her eyes, but she didn't know if they were from sadness for Lucas or horror at what her father had done. Julia discovered this. Julia worked at the law firm that represented the buyers of the forged works. She had access to all the case documents, including the evidence that proved your father's participation in the scheme. Lucas turned to face her. When we met and she discovered my surname, she began investigating on her own. I think she wanted to help me clear my father's name. And ended up dead because of it. Ended up dead because of it. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, trying to process everything she had heard. Her entire life had been built on dirty money. Her education, her home, her clothes, everything had been paid for with the suffering of people like Franklin Blackwood. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked. "Why not simply take revenge on me as you planned?" Lucas laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Because when I met you, I realized you're as much a victim as I am, because you were raised to be perfect, but never knew that perfection was stained with blood." He approached, stopping right in front of her. "And because I fell in love with you, against all my instincts of self-preservation." "Lucas, I know I should hate you. I know I should use you to destroy your father and your husband. I know Julia would probably be alive if your family didn't exist." His voice was laden with pain and confusion. "But when I look at you, all I see is a brave woman discovering she's been deceived her entire life." Eleanor stood up, walking until she was just a few centimeters from him. She could feel the heat of his body, the smell of his skin, the intensity of his blue eyes studying every inch of her face. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now you go back to your husband and pretend this conversation never happened. Go back to Massachusetts and live the life they chose for you." Lucas extended his hand and lightly touched her face. "Because staying with me will only bring you suffering. What if I don't want to go back? Then you'll have to choose between the safety of a lie and the dangerous beauty of the truth." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his hand on her face like a promise and a threat at the same time. When she opened them, she saw that Lucas was watching her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Choose the lie, Eleanor," he whispered. "Choose the safe life." "Why?" "Because if you choose the truth, I won't be able to protect you, and I couldn't bear to lose someone else I love." The declaration hung in the air between them like a rope over an abyss. Eleanor felt she was at the point of no return, that any movement she made from here would change her life forever. "What if I'm willing to take the risk?" Lucas studied her face for a long moment, as if he were trying to decipher if she really understood what she was saying. "Then I'll show you everything," he said finally. "I'll show you the documents Julia got before she died. I'll show you the evidence that connects your father, your husband, and a corruption network that extends across 2 continents. Is Henry involved in this?" "Henry is the financial intermediary. He facilitates bank transfers, creates shell companies, launders money through legitimate investments." Lucas walked to a safe hidden behind an antique painting. "Your marriage wasn't just an agreement to protect your father. It was also to ensure that Henry had access to the Montgomery family's contacts and influence." He typed a combination into the safe and removed a brown leather folder filled with documents. "Julia managed to copy this before she died. These are bank statements, correspondence, contracts, enough evidence to destroy everyone involved." Eleanor took the folder with trembling hands, feeling the physical weight of the secrets it contained. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you have the right to know the truth about your own life, and because you might be the only person who can use this information without ending up dead." Eleanor opened the folder and saw page after page of documents in English, Italian, and Portuguese. Contracts signed by her father, bank transfers approved by Henry, correspondence between intermediaries discussing special merchandise and discreet clients. It was like looking at the anatomy of a conspiracy that had lasted decades. "My God," she murmured, leafing through the papers. "It's all true. All of it." Eleanor closed the folder and held it against her chest, as if it were a shield against the brutal reality she had just discovered. What should I do with this? Whatever you want to do, you can turn them over to the authorities and see your family destroyed. You can return them to me and pretend you never saw them. Or you can try to use this information to gain your freedom. How? By confronting Henry, telling him you know the truth and want to separate, that if he tries to stop you, you'll make everything public. Eleanor laughed bitterly. You think he'll just let me walk away? After all, he invested in creating the perfect wife. I think he'll try to scare you, control you, maybe even threaten you. But in the end, if you're strong enough, he'll realize it's riskier to keep you prisoner than to let you go free. And if I'm not strong enough? Lucas approached and touched her face again, this time with both hands. Then I'll help you find that strength. The promise in his voice was so intense that Eleanor felt tears burning her eyes. For the first time in her life, someone was offering to help her be who she really was, instead of molding her into what they wanted her to be. Lucas, I know it's scary. I know it means abandoning everything you know. But you deserve a real life, Eleanor. You deserve someone who loves you for who you are, not for what you represent. He leaned in and kissed her forehead softly, a gesture so tender it contrasted drastically with the intensity of his words. You don't have to decide now, he murmured against her skin. Take the documents. Read everything. Think about what you want to do. Eleanor closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his touch, the masculine smell of his skin, the security of being in the arms of someone who saw her as a whole person, not as an extension of her surname. And you? She whispered. What will you do? I'll wait, Lucas replied. I'll wait for you to decide who you want to be. They remained like this for a few minutes, embracing on the balcony overlooking the sea, while the sun slowly rose in the American sky. Eleanor knew she needed to return to her suite before Henry woke up, but part of her wanted to stay there forever, suspended between truth and lie, between safety and freedom. Finally, she forced herself to move away. I need to go, she murmured. I know. Lucas accompanied her to the door, watching her with an expression that mixed desire and concern. Eleanor, he said when she was already in the corridor, be careful. Henry is more dangerous than he appears. I know. And if you need me, for any reason, I'll be here. Eleanor nodded and walked away, moving through the silent corridors with the folder of documents hidden under her arm. She felt as if she were carrying a bomb about to explode, capable of destroying not just her own life, but the entire structure in which it had been built. When she reached her suite, she found Henry still sleeping on the sofa. She hid the folder at the bottom of her suitcase, behind underwear and beauty products, and lay down on the bed fully dressed, pretending to sleep when he woke up an hour later. Good morning, said Henry, appearing at the bedroom door already dressed for the day. Did you sleep well? Like a rock, lied Eleanor, without opening her eyes. Great. I have an important meeting today, but we should have dinner together tonight. Like a normal couple. The irony in his voice didn't go unnoticed. Eleanor opened her eyes and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Where is the meeting? Local matters. Nothing that interests you. Henry adjusted, his tie in the mirror. I hope you use the day to reflect on our conversation yesterday, and to remember what your priorities are. After he left, Eleanor remained in bed for another half hour, looking at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened. In 24 hours, her life had been completely transformed. She had discovered that her marriage was a farce, that her father was corrupt, that a woman had died trying to expose the truth, and that she was in love with a man who should be her enemy. She finally got up and took a long shower, letting the hot water wash the fear and confusion from her skin. When she came out, she put on a red dress she had never worn before, a gift from a friend that her mother had considered inappropriately flashy, and went down for breakfast. Lucas wasn't in the restaurant, but she hadn't expected him to be. She needed time to process the morning's revelations, to read the documents and decide what to do with them. She ate quickly and returned to the suite, locked the door, and took the folder from her suitcase. She sat on the balcony with a cup of coffee and began to methodically read each document. It was worse than she had imagined. The evidence was meticulous, detailed, irrefutable. Her father hadn't just accepted occasional bribes. He had been a central piece in a sophisticated criminal operation that had lasted more than a decade. Henry wasn't just a financial executive. He was the brain behind a money laundering scheme that moved millions of dollars annually. And she had been raised with the money from these crimes, educated to be the perfect wife who would legitimize and protect the operation through her marriage. The most disturbing was a series of emails between Henry and her father, discussing her future as if she were a product being negotiated. "The girl is getting too curious about the outside world," her father had written in one message. "Maybe it's time to accelerate the marriage plans." "I agree," Henry had replied. "A busy wife is an obedient wife, and she has exactly the kind of innocence our international partners value." Eleanor felt nausea rising in her throat. They had planned every aspect of her life, from the school she attended to the books she read, all to mold her into the ideal wife for their criminal purposes. She was rereading a particularly disturbing contract when she heard a knock at the door. She quickly hid the documents and went to answer, expecting to find some hotel staff. Instead, she found Henry standing in the corridor, holding a bouquet of red roses and smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Surprise," he said, entering the suite without being invited. "I thought we could have lunch together today. I thought you had an important meeting." "I finished earlier." Henry placed the flowers in a vase and turned to observe her. "You look different today." "Different how?" "I don't know. More alert." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Where were you this morning?" Eleanor felt the blood freezing in her veins, but forced herself to maintain a neutral expression. "Sleeping. Then I had breakfast." "Alone?" "Yes, alone." Henry walked to the balcony, looking at the gardens as if he were looking for something specific. "Interesting," he murmured, "because the receptionist mentioned that a lady matching your description asked about Lucas Blackwood's suite very early today." Eleanor's heart stopped for a second, but she forced herself to appear confused. "Why? Would I do that?" "Good question." Henry turned slowly to face her. "Why would you do that, Eleanor?" The tension in the air was so thick she could almost touch it. Henry watched her like a predator studying its prey, waiting for the right moment to attack. "Maybe the receptionist is confused," she said, trying to sound casual. "There are several women in the hotel." "Yes, there are." Henry approached slowly. "But only one who is American, married 3 days ago, and foolish enough to think she can play with dangerous men without consequences." "Henry, where are the documents?" The question was so direct that Eleanor didn't have time to disguise her reaction. Her eyes widened involuntarily, and she took a step back. "What documents?" "The documents Lucas gave you this morning. The papers Julia Campani died trying to use against us." Eleanor felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. How did he know? How could he have discovered so quickly? "I don't know what you're talking about." Henry laughed, a cold sound without humor. "You know, Eleanor, one of the things I always admired about you was your honesty. It was refreshing, in a family like mine where lying is second nature." He continued approaching until he was right in front of her. "But apparently even honest women can learn to lie when necessary." "I'm not lying." "No?" Henry extended his hand. "Then you don't mind if I search your things?" Eleanor felt panic rising in her throat. The documents were hidden in the suitcase, and she knew he would find them in a matter of minutes. "You don't have the right." "I have all the rights. I'm your husband." "Not in this country. In America, I have the same rights as you." Henry smiled, but there was something predatory in the expression. "You're mistaken, dear. In America, you're just a tourist on honeymoon who can easily suffer a tragic accident, like what happened to Julia." The threat was clear and direct. Eleanor felt real fear freezing her blood, but also something else, anger. Anger at having been deceived, used, threatened. Anger that Julia had died trying to expose the truth. Anger at having wasted 27 years of her life being the perfect daughter and wife of men who saw her only as property. "No," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. What? I said no. You're not going to search my things. You're not going to threaten me, and you're not going to treat me as your property. Henry seemed genuinely surprised. It was probably the first time she had directly challenged him. Eleanor, you don't understand the situation. I understand the situation perfectly. I understand that you and my father are criminals. I understand that my marriage was a commercial agreement. I understand that Julia died because she discovered the truth about you. Her voice was growing in intensity with each word. And I understand that you're trying to scare me, so I'll continue being your obedient and silent wife. Henry's face hardened dangerously. Careful, Eleanor. You're treading on dangerous ground. Good. I'm tired of safe ground. For a moment they looked at each other in total silence. Eleanor could see Henry calculating his options, deciding whether he should try to physically intimidate her or continue with verbal threats. That was when they heard a strong knock at the door. Eleanor, Lucas's voice echoed from the corridor, is everything okay in there? The relief she felt was so intense it almost made her collapse. Henry, on the other hand, seemed genuinely alarmed for the first time. Don't answer, he whispered. Eleanor? Lucas's voice sounded louder, more concerned. Open the door. Eleanor looked at Henry, saw the fear in his eyes, and knew she had power. Maybe not much, maybe not for long, but at that moment, she had a choice. I'm fine, she shouted back. Just a minute. She turned to Henry and spoke in a low but firm voice. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this suite now. You're going to give me space to decide what I want to do with my life. And if you try to force me to do anything, I'm going to scream so loudly that half the hotel will come running. You don't know who you're messing with. I know exactly who I'm messing with, and I'm not afraid of you anymore. It was a lie. She was terrified, but there was something in the way she said it that made Henry take a step back. This isn't over, Eleanor. No, she agreed, but it's begun. Henry looked at her for another long moment, then walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. You have 24 hours to make a sensible decision, he said. After that, the choices will be made for you. When the door closed behind him, Eleanor collapsed into an armchair, trembling like a leaf. She heard footsteps in the corridor, Lucas and Henry crossing paths, and then another knock at the door. Eleanor? Can I come in? She stood up with shaky legs and opened the door. Lucas entered quickly, closing and locking it behind him. What happened? He asked, studying her face. You're pale. He knows, whispered Eleanor. About the documents, about this morning, about everything. Lucas pulled her into his arms, and she allowed herself to melt against his chest, feeling the warmth and solidity of his body like a safe harbor in a storm. It's okay, he murmured against her hair. I'm here. He gave me 24 hours. For what? To make a sensible decision. Eleanor moved away slightly to look into his eyes. Lucas, I think he's going to kill me if I don't cooperate. I won't let that happen. How can you be sure? Lucas held her face between his hands, forcing her to maintain eye contact. Because this time I know what's at stake, and because I've learned that some things are worth more than life itself. He kissed her then, slowly and deeply, as if he were sealing a promise with his lips. It was the first real kiss of her life, charged with passion, desperation, and hope. When they separated, Eleanor knew she had just crossed the line of no return. What do we do now? She whispered. Now, said Lucas, you decide if you want to continue being Eleanor Montgomery Whitman, the perfect wife, or if you want to discover who Eleanor is when no one is telling her who she should be. It was the most important question of her life, and for the first time Eleanor knew that the answer would be entirely her own. The following hours dissolved into a mist of revelations and decisions that Eleanor had never imagined she would have to make. After Henry left the suite with his sinister threat echoing in the air, she remained in Lucas's arms, feeling for the first time in her life what it meant to be protected by someone who expected nothing in return except her happiness. I can't stay here, she said finally, moving away slightly to look into the greyish-blue eyes that had become her refuge. Henry will return, and next time there won't be any conversation. I know. Lucas stroked her hair, which had come loose from the bun during the confrontation. There's a place we can go, a house that belonged to my family, in the hills above. Newport, it's been empty for years, but it's safe. And then what? I can't hide forever. Then we find a way to use these documents to guarantee your freedom, and justice for Julia. The mention of the dead woman's name made something stir in Eleanor's mind, a strange sensation, like a memory trying to emerge from very deep waters. Lucas, she said slowly, tell me more about Julia. What did she look like physically? He looked at her with curiosity but answered, tall, long brown hair, very intense green eyes. She had a small scar on her left eyebrow from when she fell off a bicycle in childhood. Lucas paused. Why are you asking? Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. The description awakened something familiar, a blurred image that danced at the periphery of her memory. I think maybe I knew her. What do you mean? I don't know. There's something familiar about what you describe, as if I'd seen that face before. Eleanor pressed her palms against her temples, trying to force the memory to emerge. How old was she when she died? 28 years old. And she had been working in New York for how long? 5 years, more or less. Before that, she had lived in Boston. The information hit Eleanor like lightning. 28 years old. That meant Julia would have been 26 when she went to New York, approximately the same age Eleanor was now. And if she had worked in the American legal sector before. Lucas, do you have any photo of her? He hesitated for a moment, then went to the bedside table and took out a worn leather wallet. From inside, he removed a small photograph and handed it to Eleanor, with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. Eleanor looked at the photo and felt the world spin around her. The face that looked back at her was familiar in a way that went beyond Lucas's description. It was a face she knew, had known, but that had somehow been erased from her memory. My God, she whispered, her legs weakening. Lucas quickly held her, helping her sit in an armchair. What is it? Do you recognize her? Yes, no, I don't know. Eleanor looked at the photo again, studying every detail of Julia's face. There's something wrong with my memory, Lucas. There are gaps, pieces of my adolescence that simply don't exist. What kind of gaps? From 15 to 18 years old, my mother always said I had gone through a difficult phase, questioning authority, being rebellious. That it had been necessary to send me to a special boarding school to help me find focus and discipline. Eleanor pressed the photo against her chest, as if this could force the memories to return. But I don't remember being rebellious. I don't. Remember the boarding school? It's as if 3 years of my life had been edited. Lucas knelt in front of her, taking her free hands. Eleanor, what do you remember from that period? Fragments, sensations, the feeling of being alone but not physically alone, as if there was someone important I lost, but I can't remember. Who? Her tears began to fall as she spoke. And there's a song, an Italian song that makes me cry whenever I hear it, but I don't know why. What song? Time to Say Goodbye. Whenever I hear it, I feel an inexplicable pain in my chest, as if I were losing someone I love. Lucas suddenly became very pale. Julia sang that song, he said in a low voice. It was her favorite. She sang it in English and Italian. The revelation was like a punch to the stomach. Eleanor rose abruptly, walking to the balcony, needing fresh air to process what she was discovering. You think I knew Julia in Boston? I think you were more than acquaintances. Lucas followed her, maintaining a respectful distance but staying close enough to protect her if necessary. I think you were close. Very close. And that your family found out and did something to separate you. His words triggered an avalanche of emotions that Eleanor couldn't name. Anger, sadness, loss, and something deeper. An inexplicable longing she had carried with her for years without understanding where it came from. I need to know the truth, she said with a determination that surprised her. The whole truth. Then, let's discover it together. Lucas went back inside the suite and returned with his laptop. They sat together on the balcony, and he began to search for information about Giulia Campani during the period she lived in Boston. What they found was disturbing. Giulia had studied law at Harvard University, where she had been a brilliant student specializing in international law. But more important than that, there were records that she had attended the same elite preparatory school in Westfield that Eleanor had attended before the lost years. St. Catherine's Academy, read Lucas from the screen. Giulia Campani, scholarship. A student from 2010 to 2013. I studied there until 2012, murmured Eleanor. From 15 to 17 years old. So you met at school? Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to force the memories to emerge. She could feel something moving in the depths of her mind, like fish in the dark waters of a deep lake. There was a girl, she said slowly. A girl who shouldn't have been there, who was different from the others, more real. What do you mean? The girls at St. Catherine's were all like me, daughters of rich families, being prepared to marry well and live decorative lives. But there was one who questioned everything, who read books that weren't in the curriculum, who talked about social injustice and corruption. Eleanor opened her eyes, looking directly at Lucas. Who sang Italian songs? Giulia. Giulia, she repeated, and for the first time the name sounded familiar in her own voice. Were we close? From what I'm finding here, you were inseparable. There are articles in the school newspaper where your names appear together in various activities. Drama group, debate club, volleyball team. Lucas continued browsing and found something that made his face harden. Eleanor, look at this. The screen was an article from the local Westfield newspaper, dated 2013. The headline was, Scandal at St. Catherine's Academy, Scholarship Student Expelled for Inappropriate Behavior. Eleanor read the article with growing horror. It described Giulia as a negative influence who had been caught in improper behavior with another student. It didn't name the other student, but mentioned she was the daughter of a prominent family in the region who had decided to transfer her to an institution more suitable for her moral formation. My God, whispered Eleanor, they separated us because you loved each other, Lucas completed gently. The truth hit Eleanor like an avalanche. Memories began to fragment and reorganize in her mind like pieces of a puzzle that finally found their places. She now remembered the secret meetings with Giulia in the school gardens, the whispered conversations about the future they wanted to build together, the first shy kiss behind the library, the promise that they would meet again, no matter what happened. And she remembered the morning she woke up in the hospital room with her mother sitting beside the bed, gently explaining that she had suffered a nervous breakdown and would need specialized treatment to recover from some confused ideas about her own nature. They institutionalized me, she said, her voice breaking. It wasn't a boarding school for rebels, it was a psychiatric clinic. Lucas pulled her into his arms again, holding her as she processed the magnitude of what had been done to her. They erased my memory, she continued, sobbing now. Literally erased 3 years of my life to transform me into the perfect daughter they wanted. Electroshock therapy, said Lucas grimly. It was still legal in the US back then, especially in expensive private clinics, especially when used to cure behaviors that families considered inappropriate. The revelation was too devastating to process completely. Eleanor cried in Lucas's arms, not just for the loss of Giulia, but for the loss of herself, for the stolen years, the erased memories, the person she had been and who was systematically destroyed to create the obedient woman her family needed. Giulia looked for me in New York, she said finally, when the tears subsided. That's why. She was investigating my father. It wasn't just about you, it was about me. I think so. I think she never forgot you. And when she discovered the evidence about your family's corruption, she saw an opportunity to help you free yourself. And died trying. They were silent for a long moment, absorbing the weight of the tragedy. Julia had died trying to save the woman she loved, and Eleanor didn't even remember loving her back. "Lucas," said Eleanor finally, "I need to go to the place where Julia died." "Why?" "Because I need to remember. I need to honor what she did for me. And because maybe there's still something there that can help us." Lucas studied her face for a long moment. "It's dangerous, if Henry discovers where we are." "Then, we have to be quick." He nodded slowly. "All right, but first let's go to the house in the hills. You need to be safe before anything else." Eleanor agreed, but she knew that safety was an illusion. There would be no true safety for her until all the truth was revealed, and those responsible for the deaths of Franklin Blackwood and Julia Campani were punished. They spent the next hour carefully planning their exit from the hotel. Lucas knew the staff and managed to arrange a discreet car and a route that would take them to the hills without passing by the main road. Eleanor packed only the essentials, some clothes, the documents Julia had died to protect, and the photograph that had awakened her lost memories. When they were about to leave, the sweet phone rang. Eleanor hesitated, but Lucas nodded for her to answer, staying close to hear the conversation. "Hello?" "Eleanor, darling." Her mother's voice sounded strangely controlled. "How are you?" "Mom? Why are you calling again?" "Just worried about you. Henry called your father a little while ago, said you two had a small disagreement." Eleanor felt anger boiling in her chest. Of course Henry had called her parents. He was using the entire family as an instrument of control. "It wasn't a small disagreement, Mom. It was a revelation." "What kind of revelation, darling?" The forced innocence in Lillian Montgomery's voice confirmed Eleanor's worst suspicions. Her mother knew everything. "You knew about Julia Campani, didn't you?" The silence on the other end of the line was too long to be natural. "Who told you that name?" "Someone who cares about me enough to tell me the truth." "Eleanor, you don't understand the complexities of the situation. I understand that you erased my memory to transform me into a perfect doll." The anger finally exploded. "I understand that you killed the only person who truly loved me." "We didn't kill anyone. Julia Campani died in a tragic accident. After discovering evidence that Dad is corrupt. Your father is a good man who made some errors of judgment, errors we're trying to correct discreetly. Correct or cover up?" Lillian sighed deeply. "Come home, Eleanor. Now. End this honeymoon and return to where you belong. We can still fix this." "I'm not coming back." "Yes, you are. Because if you don't come back, the consequences will be worse than you can imagine." "Threatening me, Mom?" "Protecting you. From yourself and from people who are using your emotional confusion for their own ends." Eleanor looked at Lucas, who was listening to everything with a somber expression. "Julia wasn't emotional confusion. She was love, and you destroyed that. It was a phase, an adolescent experiment that went too far. It was real. It was dangerous. For you, for our family, for our future. We did what was necessary to protect everyone involved. Everyone except Julia. Julia made her own choices, choices that led her to the consequences she suffered." The coldness in her mother's voice was the final confirmation Eleanor needed. There was no salvation in that family. There was no real love, only control and ownership. "Goodbye, Mum," she said, with a calmness that surprised her. "When we meet again, it will be in the courts." She hung up the phone before Lillian could respond. "Let's go," she said to Lucas. "Now." They left the suite quickly, using the service stairs to avoid the main lobby. The car Lucas had arranged was a discreet Ford that wouldn't attract attention on the region's roads. Eleanor hid in the back seat as they left the hotel, only sitting upright when they were on the road that climbed into the hills. The house Lucas took her to was an old stone villa, built on a natural terrace that offered a spectacular view of the valley below. It had been empty for years but was structurally solid and had electricity and running water. "My grandmother lived here," explained Lucas as he opened the heavy wooden door. "She died when I was 15, and since then the house has been empty. My father never managed to part with it." The interior was simple but elegant, with furniture covered by white sheets and the air laden with old memories. Lucas uncovered an armchair and a table, and Eleanor sat there, finally allowing emotional exhaustion to take over. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now you rest, and I'll go find more information about Julia's accident." "Can I go with you?" "Better not. Henry probably already discovered we fled the hotel. If they see me with you, they'll know where we are." Lucas knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. From now on, there's no going back. If we continue on this path, your life as a Montgomery is over. Your family, your social position, your financial security, all of it will disappear. And if I say I don't care, then I'll help you build a new life, a true life." He kissed her softly, a kiss full of promises and possibilities. When they separated, Eleanor saw in his gaze something she had never seen in the eyes of any man: absolute respect for her choices, even if those choices led them both to destruction. "Go," she said. "Find out what happened to Julia, but come back to me." "Always," promised Lucas. After he left, Eleanor explored the house, discovering rooms full of antique furniture and family photographs that told the story of the Blackwoods through the generations. It was a family of artists and intellectuals, people who valued beauty, truth, and integrity above wealth and power. In the library, she found books on art, philosophy, and poetry in various languages. Many had annotations in the margins, reflections handwritten by generations of Blackwoods who had used that space to think and dream. It was there, leafing through a volume of poems by Emily Dickinson, that she found something that made her stop: a handwritten letter used as a page marker. It was written in English, in a handwriting she immediately recognized. "My love," the letter said, "if you're reading this, it means you've managed to reach the truth we sought for so long. The Blackwood House has always been a refuge for those seeking justice against corruption. Franklin was a friend of my professor at Harvard, and when I learned of the connection with the Montgomerys, I understood that fate had brought me close to you again." It was a letter from Julia, to her, written probably shortly before she died. Eleanor continued reading with her heart racing. "I know you don't remember me, but I never forgot you. I never forgot our promise that one day we would be free to love who we wanted. I came to New York following clues about your father's corruption, but also with the hope of finding a way to free you from the golden prison they transformed you into. The documents I collected are hidden in 3 different places. One set is with Lucas, as you've probably already discovered. Another is in a safe deposit box in Boston, whose key is hidden in my apartment. The third is in the place where we met, St. Catherine's, hidden in the library where we kissed for the first time. If something happens to me, use this evidence to destroy them all. Use it to be free. Use it to honor the love we built and they tried to erase. I hope that when you read this, you remember me. But even if you don't remember, know that I was happy to have loved you, and that I will die happy knowing you have the chance to be free. All yours forever, Julia." Eleanor finished reading the letter with tears running down her face. Julia had risked everything to save her, even knowing she might never remember what they had shared. But now she remembered. Not everything, but enough. She remembered hands intertwined in literature classes, stolen kisses between the library shelves, whispered promises that one day they would be free to live their love openly. And she remembered the morning she woke up in the hospital, with a pain in her chest she couldn't explain, feeling as if she had lost the most important thing in her life. When Lucas returned, it was already night. He found her in the library, still holding Julia's letter. "I found this," she said, extending the paper to him. Lucas read the letter in silence, his expression becoming increasingly somber. "She knew she was going to die," he said finally. "And yet she continued. For me." Eleanor stood up, feeling an iron determination forming in her chest. "Lucas, we need to go to Boston, and then to Massachusetts." "Why?" "Because we're going to finish what Julia started. We're going to destroy all of them." Lucas studied her for a long moment. "Are you sure? Once we start, there will be no going back. Henry, your parents, the whole corruption scheme, they will all fight to the death to stop us. Then we'll have to fight harder. Eleanor approached him, feeling something new shining in her eyes. She was no longer the frightened woman who had arrived in Newport a week ago. She was someone who had found her truth and was willing to fight for it. "Julia died loving me," she said. "The least I can do is live honoring that love." Lucas kissed her then, not with the gentleness of before, but with the passion of someone who recognized a warrior when he saw one. When they separated, both knew they had crossed another threshold. "Then we go." "To war," he murmured against her lips. "We go to war," she agreed. But first, they had the night. A night to be just Lucas and Eleanor, two survivors who found each other in the middle of the storm and decided to face it together. Lucas led her by the arm to the main bedroom of the house, where an antique bed dominated the space. The moonlight entered through the windows, bathing everything in a silvery glow that made the moment almost magical. "Are you sure?" he asked, stopping at the door. "I'm sure that this is the first completely free decision I've made in my life," replied Eleanor, "and I want it to be with you." What happened between them that night was more than sex. It was reclamation, Eleanor reclaiming her body, her right to pleasure, her autonomy over her own choices, and Lucas giving himself completely to her, not as a conqueror but as an equal, as a partner in the journey of discovery she was making. They made love with the urgency of those who know time is limited, but also with the tenderness of those who recognize something precious and fragile. And when they finally fell asleep, intertwined in the bed that had witnessed generations of love from the Blackwood family, both knew they had found something worth fighting to protect. But outside, in the dark hills of the Atlantic coast, other plans were being made. Henry had discovered where they were, and was approaching with resources and determination sufficient to end the threat they represented, once and for all. The war was just beginning. Eleanor woke before dawn with the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't a specific noise, but a change in the quality of the silence that surrounded her. Lucas slept deeply beside her, a protective arm still wrapped around her waist, but she carefully disentangled herself and walked to the window. In the first light of day, she saw dark figures moving among the oaks that surrounded the property. 3 men, maybe 4, approaching the house with the caution of predators. Her blood froze when she recognized the familiar silhouette of Henry leading the group. "Lucas," she whispered urgently, returning to the bed and shaking his shoulder. "They're here." He awoke instantly, the years in New York having sharpened his survival instincts. Without asking questions, he rose silently and dressed with economical, precise movements. "How many?" he asked in a low voice. 4, maybe 5. "Henry is with them." Lucas nodded, opening an old drawer and removing a pistol that Eleanor didn't know existed. Seeing her alarmed expression, he murmured, "Family inheritance. My grandfather fought in the resistance." He quickly checked the gun, then turned to her with a serious expression. "There's a secret passage in the pantry that leads to the cellar. From there you can exit through the back of the property without being seen. I know people in the village who can help you get safely to Boston. I'm not going to leave you alone." "Eleanor." "No." She dressed quickly, taking the folder with Julia's documents and the letter she had found. "Whatever happens, happens to us two together." Lucas looked at her for a long moment, recognizing that arguing would be useless. The frightened woman who had arrived in Newport had completely disappeared, replaced by someone who understood that some battles needed to be fought regardless of the outcome. "Then we'll leave together," he said finally. "But if something goes wrong, promise you'll run. Promise you'll use this evidence to destroy them. I promise." They silently headed to the kitchen, where Lucas opened a trapdoor disguised under a spice shelf. The passage was narrow and dark, but led to a stone tunnel that ran the entire length of the house. It was when they were going down that they heard the front door being broken down. "Blackwood!" Henry's voice echoed through the house. "We know you're here. Come out and no one gets hurt." Lucas and Eleanor looked at each other in the darkness of the tunnel. Both knew it was a lie. Henry hadn't traveled all that distance to negotiate. They continued in silence through the passage until they reached the cellar, a large space excavated in the natural rock of the hill. There were old wine barrels, shelves of worm-eaten wood, and on one wall a small door that Lucas had mentioned. "This door opens into the woods behind the house," he explained in a low voice. "From there we can reach the car I left hidden last night." But when Lucas tried to open the door, they discovered it was blocked from the outside. Someone had anticipated the escape route. "Damn," he murmured. "They know the house better than I thought." Heavy footsteps echoed above their heads as Henry's men searched each room. It would be a matter of minutes until they discovered the secret passage. "Is there another exit?" whispered Eleanor. "There is, but—" Lucas hesitated. "It's risky. A very old tunnel that leads directly to the cliff. It was excavated during World War II as an emergency escape route. Let's go." Lucas guided her between the barrels to a wall that seemed solid, but had a movable section hidden behind a wine rack. The tunnel beyond was even narrower than the first, barely allowing them to pass one at a time. As they crawled through the dark passage, they heard distant voices indicating the men had found the trapdoor in the kitchen. "Here," someone shouted. "They went down here." The tunnel seemed endless, a stone serpent that climbed up and down through the hill. The walls were damp and covered with moss, and more than once Eleanor had to force herself not to think about the tonnage of rock above their heads. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, they saw a faint light ahead. The tunnel ended in a natural opening on the face of the cliff, hidden by bushes and offering a dizzying view of the valley far below. "This way," said Lucas, pointing to an almost invisible trail that snaked along the hillside. They began the careful descent, using roots and protruding stones as support. It was treacherous, especially with the morning dampness making everything slippery, but it was the only option they had. They were halfway down when they heard the sound of engines, approaching on the road that led to the village. 3 black vehicles moving too fast for the narrow, winding road. "They're surrounding the entire area," said Lucas, stopping to assess the situation. "There are too many people. Even if we reach the village, we won't be able to leave unnoticed." Eleanor looked down at the road where the black cars were strategically positioning themselves, then up, where she knew Henry and his men continued the search. It was like being trapped in a funnel that was slowly closing. "Lucas," she said, an idea forming in her mind, "how many people do you know in the region who have reasons to hate my father?" "What do you mean?" "People who were harmed by the corruption schemes. People who lost lands, businesses, families because of the bought sentences." Eleanor opened the folder she carried, leafing through the papers. "There are names here, specific cases where my father was bribed to decide against innocent people." Lucas watched her with growing admiration. "Are you thinking of creating a militia? I'm thinking of creating justice." They continued the descent, but instead of heading to the main village, Lucas took her to a small isolated farm where a man named Mark Benedict lived. Mark had lost his property in a fraudulent legal dispute 5 years earlier, when Judge Montgomery decided in favor of a development company that wanted to build a resort. Lucas knocked on the door of the simple house, and a 50-year-old man with calloused hands and intelligent eyes appeared on the threshold. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" "Mark, I need your help, and maybe you want to hear what this woman has to say about the judge who stole your land." In the next 30 minutes, Eleanor showed Mark the documents that proved how her father had been bribed to decide against him. She saw the man's face go from surprise to anger, and finally to a cold determination that she recognized in herself. "There are others," Mark said finally. "Many others who were harmed by this man. If you really have evidence—" "Have enough evidence to destroy the entire network," assured Eleanor. "But I need to get to Boston alive to make it public." Mark nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls." What happened in the next 2 hours was something Eleanor would never forget. Mark contacted an informal network of people who had been harmed by judicial corruption, farmers who lost lands, businessmen who went bankrupt because of bought sentences, families who saw relatives unjustly imprisoned. When Henry and his men came down from the hill, they discovered that the entire village was waiting for them. It wasn't a violent crowd, but a determined group of people who finally had evidence of what they had always suspected. They calmly surrounded the black cars, blocking all escape routes. From the hiding place on Mark's farm, Eleanor watched Henry get out of his vehicle with a furious expression, trying to intimidate the residents with his authoritarian presence. But these were people who had nothing more to lose. "Where is my wife?" he demanded. "What wife?" replied Mark with a provocative tranquility. "We only see a criminal who came to our village looking for trouble." It was then that Eleanor made the bravest decision of her life. She left the house, walking toward the confrontation with the folder of documents in her hands. "I'm here, Henry." The silence that followed was as tense as a razor wire. Henry watched her approach, calculating his options in a situation that had completely escaped his control. "Eleanor, stop this madness. Come with me now, and we can still resolve everything in a civilized manner." "Like you resolved in a civilized manner with Julia." "Julia died in an accident. Julia died because she discovered the truth about you." Eleanor raised the folder. "The same truth that's here, documented in every sordid detail." Henry took a step toward her, but stopped when he realized the residents had moved to form a protective circle around Eleanor. "You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing," he said, his voice laden with barely contained threat. "You don't understand the people you're messing with. I understand they're cowards who only know how to attack defenseless women and innocent families. Your family isn't innocent. Your father—" "My father is a criminal," Eleanor cut in, her voice echoing through the silent village. "And so are you, and my mother, and everyone who participated in this scheme." She opened the folder and began to read aloud, documenting each crime, each bribe, each life destroyed by the greed of the corruption network. The residents listened, in growing silence, recognizing their own sufferings in the papers she held. "And now," she said finally, "you're all going to pay." Henry tried one last move, signaling to his men. But he discovered that the residents were also armed and that they were desperately outnumbered. "You're making a mistake," he said, the arrogance finally cracking. "Without your family, you are nothing. You have no money, no status, no protection." "Have something better," replied Eleanor, looking at Lucas, who was standing beside her. "I have the truth." It was Mark who suggested they call the local press. Within hours, journalists from Boston and Providence arrived at the village, attracted by the story of an heiress who was exposing her own family. Eleanor gave her first press conference sitting on the steps of the village church, with Julia's documents spread around her as irrefutable evidence. She told everything: the electroshock therapy, the lost love, the corruption network, Julia's death. When she finished, there were tears in the eyes of several journalists. "Why are you doing this?" asked a reporter from Boston. "Why destroy your own family?" "Because Julia Campani died trying to save me," replied Eleanor, "and because some things are more important than blood, like justice, like love, like truth." The first reports aired that same night. Within 48 hours, the scandal had spread throughout America and reached international news. Judge Montgomery was removed from his duties and held in preventive detention. Henry was detained in Rhode Island while awaiting arraignment. Eleanor's mother called only once. "You destroyed everything," said Lillian, her voice brittle with tears and anger. "Our family, our reputation, our future." "I destroyed a lie," replied Eleanor, "and built a truth. Your truth cost everything we worked to build. What you built was paid for with blood. It was time for it to collapse." 2 weeks later, Eleanor and Lucas were in Boston, in the apartment that had belonged to Julia. With the help of authorities, they found the safe deposit box she had mentioned in the letter. Inside, there was more evidence, but also something personal: photographs of Eleanor and Julia during their school days, love letters that Julia had kept all these years, and a simple silver ring with an inscription, "Forever, J." "She never forgot you," said Lucas softly, watching Eleanor hold the ring against the light. "And I will honor that for the rest of my life." They visited Julia's grave in Mount Auburn Cemetery, a simple but well-maintained place. Eleanor placed fresh flowers and stayed there for an hour, finally being able to say goodbye to the woman who loved her enough to die trying to save her. "Thank you," she whispered to the marble headstone, "for showing me who I really am." 3 months later, All the main people involved in the corruption scheme had been arrested or indicted. The trial became a landmark in the fight against judicial corruption in the United States, with Eleanor serving as the prosecution's key witness. She returned to Massachusetts only once to testify against her own father. It was the most difficult moment of her life, to look into the eyes of the man who raised her and describe him publicly as the criminal he really was. When Judge Montgomery was sentenced to 15 years in prison, Eleanor felt not satisfaction, but a deep sadness for the family she could have had if they had chosen love instead of power. Lillian Montgomery never spoke to her daughter again. She sold everything she could sell to pay for lawyers and maintain appearances, but in the end went to live discreetly in a small town, a shadow of the arrogant woman she had been. Eleanor, in turn, discovered that living without family money was harder than she had imagined, but also more liberating. She got a job as a translator in New York, using the languages she had learned in her privileged education to build an independent life. Lucas sold the family properties in New England and used the money to create a foundation in the names of Franklin Blackwood and Julia Campani, dedicated to helping victims of judicial corruption obtain justice. They married in a small civil ceremony in Newport, in the same gazebo where they met. There was no family present. His was dead, hers was imprisoned or had disowned them. But there were friends. Mark Benedict came from the hills with his wife. Several journalists who had covered the case attended, and a group of people who had been helped by the Blackwood Campani Foundation made a point of being present. "It's not exactly the wedding of your dreams," said Lucas, when they exchanged simple gold rings. "It's exactly the wedding of my dreams," replied Eleanor, "because it's real." 2 years later, they bought a small house on the outskirts of Boston, with a garden where Eleanor planted jasmine like the ones that perfumed Newport. She never became rich again, but discovered it was possible to be happy with much less than she had imagined. Every morning before leaving for work, she stopped in front of Julia's photograph that she kept on the living room table. It was the same photo Lucas had shown her that day that changed her life, but now it was lovingly framed and surrounded by fresh flowers. "Good morning, my love," she always whispered. "Thank you for teaching me that true love sometimes means letting go." Lucas watched her perform this ritual every day and never felt jealous. He understood that Julia had been Eleanor's adolescent love, the first awakening to who she really was, and that he was the love of the adult woman, the person she chose to be after she completely knew herself. On a September afternoon, exactly 3 years after they arrived in Newport for a honeymoon that transformed into a revolution, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. "How are we going to explain this story to our child?" she asked, holding the pregnancy test with trembling hands. "We'll tell the truth," replied Lucas, kissing her forehead, "that sometimes love requires courage, that justice is worth more than comfort, and that the best stories are those where brave people decide to be who they really are, no matter the price." And about Julia, we'll tell that there was a brave woman who died so you could be free, and that she's part of our family even though she's no longer here. That night, lying in the simple but comfortable bed of their home in Boston, with Chat, the September moon coming through the open windows, Eleanor finally felt completely at peace. She had lost everything she thought mattered: family, money, social position. But she had gained something infinitely more precious: herself. "Do you regret it?" asked Lucas in the dark. "Regret what?" "Having left behind the life they had planned for you." Eleanor thought for a moment about the woman she would have been if she had never met Lucas in Newport, a rich but empty woman, married to a criminal living a golden lie for the rest of her life. "Never," she replied, her hand finding his under the covers. "I would rather be 1,000 times poor and true than rich and false." "And what about your family?" "My family is here," she said, placing her hand on her still flat belly. "You, our baby, and Julia's memory. It's all I need." Outside, Boston slept to the sound of its hundreds of years of history. But inside that small house, a new story was just beginning. The story of a woman who chose truth instead of convenience, love instead of security, and courage instead of conformity. Years later, when she told the story to the daughter who was born the following winter, a girl with intense green eyes like Julia's, Eleanor always ended the same way. "And so, my darling, your mother finally learned the difference between living and merely existing, and discovered that it's worth losing everything to gain herself." The girl, who was named Julia Hope Blackwood, grew up knowing she carried the name of a heroine, and that her own life was proof that true love, be it romantic, familial, or self-love, always wins in the end. In Newport, in the villa where it all began, a discreet plaque marks the place where Eleanor Montgomery became Eleanor Blackwood. The plaque simply says, "Here a woman learned to be free." And in the gardens of the Vanderbilt house, where she danced alone in the rain that first night of discovery, the red roses continue to bloom, as if the earth itself remembered that sometimes it takes a storm to reveal the beauty that has always been hidden beneath the surface. The story of Eleanor and Lucas became legend on the Atlantic coast, a reminder that true love is not always easy or convenient, but that when it's real, it's worth any sacrifice. And somewhere, in the realm of spirits or simply in the collective memory of those who believe in the transforming power of love, Julia Campani smiles. Because her death was not in vain, because she saved the woman she loved, and because the love she planted blossomed into a family that honors her memory every day.